Well, welcome. Looks like we have some, I think you've been here before.
I think so.
And I'm not sure about you.
I've been here.
I think it's been a while though, hasn't it? A couple months ago or something.
I wasn't able to make it last month, but I think we were kind of regular.
Yeah, oh, good. Well, I'm Paul, okay, and nice to have you. Thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate you coming. I usually start out with welcome. And then if anyone has any wonderful things to talk about, whether they're needing a job, offering jobs, or have some interesting tidbits that you found, I think we could go on for the whole night talking about, like we just recently did, about outages and how to deal with those. But interesting time. Anyway, anybody have anything that they want to bring up, or questions or thoughts? Okay. One thing, always looking for presenters or topics. If you have topics you're saying, hey, I'd like to hear this, I can reach out to people, and they usually are very responsive companies or open source projects. Please, and if you're not on Forge, I'm hoping you're on, I know you're on Forge. Are you on Forge? Good. Just on the Kubernetes channel or whatever, or just DM me. Please, topics, or even you'd like to present. Okay, we'd love to have you present as well. So anyways, if there's nothing, then I'll just leave it up to you. I've already asked him to kind of introduce himself, kind of where he's coming from, his life history, but kind of why he came to Spectro Cloud. And then also he said during the presentation, ask questions. We'll have kind of a Q&A, more formal at the end, but just feel free if you have questions please during the presentation. As always, these mics are very, very good. Very good. And tonight we don't have chips, so we won't hear the crackling, but just to let you know if there's any other chatter or whatever, it will pick up. So anyways, thank you for coming. And I'm going to thank you on the doors.
Thanks, Paul. All right, guys. Hi, my name is Austin Iveson. I'm here to talk about Kubernetes at the edge and how we've secured that here at Spectro Cloud using an open source tool called Kairos, and then how we expand that capability into our platform that we play for. A little about myself. I live in South Salt Lake. I've been working with Kubernetes for about 5 years. My last roles included a software QA engineer for a project called Rancher. I've got a home lab. I do a lot of rock climbing, and then the big thing is me and my fiance just take care of our pets. Pretty much, it feels like work and pets are the biggest things in my life right now. So, yeah, to kind of go over an agenda. So we're going to talk about K8s and Kairos and where this was birthed from, and then how we secure the edge with Kairos, and then just basics of our palette platform. If you guys do have questions, again, it's just the four of us, so we can go ahead and talk about it if you want. But yeah, so the definition of Kairos is an immutable Linux meta distribution for edge Kubernetes. What that can look like to many, is edge could be IoT devices far out, it could be near edge in like manufacturing, data centers. I've seen that. And if you haven't heard of Kairos, you may have heard of its kind of predecessor, like the predecessor to K3s OS is actually Kairos. A lot of the engineers from Rancher Labs had a vision, and they wanted K3s and 3OS to work essentially like a Kubernetes first Linux distribution. But the way we wanted to build it wasn't locking you into like a single vendor. So we essentially have built out a tool that allows you to choose your own distribution and stuff, and I'll go over that later, and also make it immutable. So, the moment you boot, it could be an edge host, the OS loads, and Kubernetes starts. So there are other K8 specific OSs out there, but I'll go over some unique things about Kairos specifically. So for instance, why from the cloud to the edge? Can you see this working? Retail stores, we have personally many retail customers now. A big one just came up, and they're using our edge platform to deliver to their stores. They are working on their first round of releases, but they are targeting their 40,000 stores, and they're using a very unique platform that we have, where we have made HA, and I'll talk about this later, but HA 2-node clusters We've also I've personally seen manufacturing customers, one of my old customers at SUSE, they had a data center in their manufacturing plant. They needed that air gap, but on the manufacturing floor, they were deploying an immutable OS. But, keeping that data in the cluster can be bad for some, because what if these things aren't in a data center? What if they're just like a camera on the highway or something, or if they're like just a kiosk that we see on the streets nowadays, and somehow someone's able to go in there and hijack the data? Well, there's going to be a few things that we do to make that top of mind. So that's a little Kairos logo, the little armadillo. So if it's secure, it's locked up like an armadillo. We make it immutable with our Kairos agent. We use secure boot, TPM measurements, and we actually support TPM, so we're able to encrypt the user data. But obviously the OS, everything here on the left side, is going to be completely immutable. You can change some of that with, like by mounting different paths and defining that in the configuration steps of all this. But yeah, so essentially just understand that you're able to completely have like an immutable operating system, and then that will just get wiped and refreshed upon boot, whereas the user data will be completely encrypted at rest. So that was definitely top of mind for the advent of Kairos. And again, this is our open source cloud native computing foundation project that we have up there. And so if you guys we're always looking for maintainers, we maintain it ourselves. And so if you ever want to take a look, obviously look there. This is my favorite bit. Granted, like everyone likes the security part. The one thing for me was the approach to Kubernetes, in my opinion, was to try and take away like the OS layer. Like it became very like, I just need something. But the checks and balances in a big corporate entity usually is like, well, I'm not, verified on that OS. So if you start building around specific OSs, that becomes a problem. So the way we've done this is we actually give you a Docker file. You define your container for a distro in the build process, and you will get a bootable image as long as it's using systemd, because that is what trusted boot is essentially built on. Get around that. We actually do support Alpine, but we're using OpenSUSE or Debian kernels to accomplish that. And again, you can do this all with cloud init configurations, and just inside built into essentially the container image and the Docker file will be a list of K3S parameters, whether it's like, hey, this is just going to be an agent, or this is going to be a server, or it's going to be able to operate as both. And so what that ends up looking like is you could have fundamentally, 3 servers at the edge that all come up on boot. They all connect to each other because you pre-configured that, and it's good to go. And so that's kind of where Kairos, and I believe really like a lot of Kubernetes platforms are going to go. The OS is going to be, it's not unimportant in this, but it's going to be less defined. People aren't going to want to be locked into a single one, and some flexibility there. So again, we just wanted to focus on delivering a Kubernetes first OS. So it's like you can still have everything you want. Previously used to. In fact, I did check with engineering. You could even use something like Arch. It's systemd. So yeah, in a nutshell, build systems you trust. You can package in all of your applications, and they can stand up on boot. And that's just we mess with cloud init. That's possible. If you want to take a picture of the QR code, that'll take you to the docs. And so, yeah, that's again our open source tool. Yeah, if you have a question.
So I'm sorry, as you know, I'm kind of in and out, but where would Talos be in this world?
Yeah, so they're except I believe they don't want you to actually they end up operating with just API, I believe that they host, right? But it is comparable in the sense that we do on boot provide K3S out of the box, whatever else you define in that aspect, and you're able to have a cluster up and going. So they are kind of our competitor. What we like to believe our position is hey, yes, Talos is really cool. Don't get me wrong. I think it's great, but they're going to have to pass off all that OS stuff to SecOps teams and stuff, and understand why the business has to buy into that instead of just using what they're already used to. All you do with Kairos is get an agent that goes in and makes it immutable. So I think that's a better streamlined service experience, but also to each his own. So, everyone has a place in the market. So how does that fit into what we've done at Palette? Well, Spectro Cloud with Palette. It's very unique in the sense that, we have seen the ability to have a platform, multi-cloud. I came from that past life. I know that life, having worked at SUSE. But the one thing that Palette does really cool, down here at the bottom where it says built for scale, we've completely made a decentralized platform. So we have tested this. Up to 10,000 APIs have been called to our Palette instance. And I think they're getting up into the teens now, where we're constantly testing this, because one of our biggest customers said, hey, we're going to do this with you, but we want to make sure your theory works. And so in practice, a third party came out and said, yeah, it can actually house 10,000 plus clusters. And again, we're multi-cloud. We operate for data centers in the edge, and then also these hyperscalers. We did also build a CAPI provider for MAS, and we open source that. So that is one thing here that's slightly mentioned. So if you've ever used MAS, or if you're an Ubuntu shop, or if you just like Ubuntu, that is an option. The big thing here though, at the top, this is what drew me in when I first saw it, and it is one of our is the full stack declarative management. And that's where this slide comes into play. So the big thing that we started to see was, you treat, the whole premise of Kubernetes seemed to be to treat your applications as cattle, not pets, treat your infrastructure as cattle, not pets. What we're starting to see, it's kind of hard to do with Kubernetes if people aren't staying up to date on versions. If you get a breadth of Kubernetes clusters and you're not able to manage those at scale, what does that look like? They start having drift. And so we actually give you the opportunity to manage everything inside of what we call a profile. So starting from the infrastructure layer down, down here on up to the actual application. And that can be your own applications, as long as they're a Helm chart, manifest, Zarf. You can inject these into what we call a profile. And that's kind of the day zero. Everyone was doing the bringing up clusters. That's fine and dandy. Everyone's figured that out. But how do you start managing blueprinting out a way to bring up clusters consistently across geos, across dev, prod, test environments? That's how we kind of do it under the hood. We wanted to make sure that we have something that you can essentially version control. And you'll see this in the demo. You can actually take this profile, version it, and then if you change something in it, you have a whole nother profile, but the rest of the stack stays the same. So whether you're redeploying or reconfiguring, you can kind of just do that on the fly, as well as do that very, very programmatically as well, because we have API-driven first technology. Everything you can do in the UI, you can do via API, which I will show later. And we also have Terraform providers. Does anyone have any questions, by the way? Is there Kairos about Palette so far? Not yet. Yes, no, not yet. Yeah, cool. So this is kind of what's going on under the hood. We took cluster API, as you can see here, and we built our provisioning process all around that. I think we are the only ones doing that. Actually, I know that other tools are using their own in-house provisioning. But so if it's upstream, we're contributing to that, as well as maintaining it so it works inside of Palette. And so what ends up happening is cluster API says, hey, here's your declared state, talks to the cluster, starts applying the node configuration via the cluster profile. And this is where things get really cool. We do this thing where we pivot. Essentially what that allows us to do is all the reconciliation loops that happen in Kubernetes clusters, instead of having a central managed plane somewhere else managing that, we actually shift that onto the workload cluster. So they're just managing it themselves. And that's why we're able to be completely decentralized. We don't actually have to, to talk to these workload clusters. We want to check in, do health checks, but we can manage them from there. So Pilot completely we actually have the ability to make dark clusters. And this has been something that we've seen in the public sector or in far off IoT places where they will simply configure essentially Kairos and then a profile, and then on boot, it's up and running, and it may not even have internet connection. But it's just a simple boot process. And so all that starts standing up. You can apply your own applications. It works on VMs, on bare metal. It works in the cloud. We also allow for regular backups, anything in here, auto healing, auto scaling, cert rotation. Cert rotation is huge because not a lot of people have figured out how to work on that with Happy. They kind of have to build it themselves, which is, fine. And yeah, so I believe, again, some really cool, interesting things about Palette and how Kairos extends it, allowing this, what is called a machine registration token, to just onboard the device into the cloud, or into Palette, I should say. So you can manage it just on boot. It could be zero touch provisioning. You can stamp it at the factory that you buy your hardware from. And then again, this 10,000 decentralized architecture allows for tons of clusters. And then the 2-node architecture is also something that we have basically under our offering. And I believe that's going, so we're currently at 4.6, and I believe that's going GA 4.7. And if you have questions about that, I actually have a little bit of a demo to show you on it. Let's fix it up with this and go into this overview. So this is going to be a demo of just, first off, a little bit about Palette. I'm signed into our SaaS environment. You can have self-hosted. You can also have a dedicated SaaS environment. But we also just give customers, the way we've built this and how cool it is, we can actually have multiple customers using the same exact technical Palette instance, but they can just have a tenant inside it. Because we did this, it's using MongoDB. So essentially, imagine a tenant is just going to have its own table. So then it's fully encrypted, completely separated. And so each tenant has that capability. So it's fully separate. And so I do like to highlight that because multi-tenancy, usually you have to consume something like a mod, else like that, to make it work for other platforms out there. So what we're looking at is like the tenant administrator. And we can see like we've got a few clusters. I've got a fair amount of coworkers out in Europe and even some individuals down there in South America that have been spinning up clusters. We actually have, technically, I think there's literal customer training going on right now in our Palette instance. But I'm going to go down to my project, which is its own little entity. And if I go into clusters, I can see what is stood up. Let me explain where these are existing. These are just some, the testing environment, just 2 virtual machines that have stood up a Kairos image. Well, actually CanvOS, which is a wrapper of Kairos for our profile side of things. And then this K8's meetup home, this is just a box sitting at my house. And it is built using these things called a profile. So if we come in here and take a look at all these different profiles, you can filter by cloud types. But I'm going to click on this single node K8's meetup and kind of talk you through the bare bones of this. So when we actually look at this, this is just my defined pack. And a pack is essentially a layer in that profile. This is going to be specified on the build of my OS. So I pump that in there so it can reference the provider image up in Docker Hub, and it will then boot using those provider images that I built with CanvOS for this specific single node edge cluster. Does that make sense? Is that connecting the dots? It can be a little like, there's a lot of build process in there. I can show you the code behind it too, but it's not super difficult to do, but it's kind of like abstract sometimes.
So this is just the onboarding part of it, right?
This is just the build of the profile. So I'm basically building a blueprint for an edge node. What that edge node does ends up being like up to the customer, ends up being up to you guys. But this one is just the infrastructure layer. So like in this could be a whole lot more complicated. We could start adding layers. We could start adding CSI drivers. We could define different case like Kubernetes versions. We actually support like RK2, kubeadm, et cetera, and we've built some of our own. So this is just going to be what is defined. This set doesn't actually have the cluster running on it per se. This is just something I defined previously. So if we go to look at the cluster that I'm running in the case, you can see that I've actually started to change some things to that. So I deployed the what's called the infrastructure layer, but I've actually added on a whole nother section of applications here. And what this ends up looking like, again, as long as it's a Helm chart, as long as it's manifest, you can add it to this add-on layer. So you can have the same infrastructure across, multiple devices, but then say you have a very specific kind of applications you want to put on different, on that same layer, but you don't want them all to be the same. You can specify it there, and then you can version them out. So if we go into this profile, we can actually take a look at that. So this is the actual active profile of a Kubernetes cluster at my house. We've got Nginx, MetalLB, everything specified in there. And then the things that end up changing, you can either version out the actual version. And so I just added this real quick for today's demo. But I think this one will show, I was on a previous version of Kubernetes. But I'm going to go ahead and change this back to what is currently deployed, the 1.2. And I upgraded the Kubernetes version. But that is a version control that's completely built into the platform. And so you're able to, at scale, essentially manage multiple clusters. How do you guys handle upgrades now currently?
Upgrade.
Upgrade? Yeah. Are we in a cloud in EKS, AKS? Okay, cool. Yeah. So that's also something, and if we want, I can present on that in about 2 months. We're actually building out a template, we call them cluster templates, and it will detect if something like this changes, and it's in testing right now. So once it actually goes into tech preview, I'll come back. And when we change something like that, it can show every single cluster that is deployed using that template or using that profile, and then you could sequentially do a rolling upgrade. You can do a timed upgrade, basically just apply a cron job, and that is something that we've worked on. So
what's in scope for layers? So is this just anything you could apply a Kubernetes manifest to manage? The node level things is often not able to manage via Kubernetes manifest. So is there some special CRDs or stuff involved? The top stuff looks like normal manifest that I could have used Helm. This is just rendered somewhere else and applied.
yeah.
Is that an accurate way of trying to?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's a Helm chart, you can just apply it. And some of these things, so we do have our own repository that we manage all of these packs in, and that's what makes up the profile. But if you have your own OCI compliant repository, you can, build your own, or you can use our own. But for instance, if we go into this add-on, and let's do, let's just say we're going to add, let's do that. So let me actually just build the actual profile because that will make more sense to you. So cluster profile. So let's just say we're doing a demo live 0.0, and we're going to say this is a full one. So this will be, again, these are all the places we can deploy this to. For this instance, let's just say we have, where do I have a decent sized So you'll define the OS layer, come in there. This is all coming from the public repo or private repos. So this is just going to be the basic GKE configuration for the infrastructure layer, which is going to be the OS Kubernetes version. And then I think we're going to do networking after this. Yep. So let's do that. And we go to the next layer, and then confirm. And now you can start saying hey, do I want to add a manifest? Do I want to add a Zarf? Do I want to add a Helm chart? And so you could do public packs or private packs, depending on where you choose, right? So does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay,
So it's kind of there's cluster API stuff, maybe handling things that aren't
cool.
to be managed by manifest. And then once you have access to an API server, it can take over some of the responsibilities that maybe Argo does for applications. And if you're an infra team trying to manage things uniformly across a bunch of clusters, you don't want to go configure Argo for all of those. And you might prefer a tool like this that can more unify the.
Absolutely. And you can also, I mean, you don't have to necessarily completely rely on the entire profile. Like we support having Argo in that stack. So like this is the shop, like you go and filter by name. We support building like Argo into it. And again, like if you have like any kind of subject matter experts in all of this, they'll be able to see like a single place for the entire stack. And a really cool, interesting part about this is if like our packs, we do, we check for any kind of like dependencies breaking. So if a version gets upgraded, you'll see how that affects the rest of the profile, which has been quite useful for a lot of individuals. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Also expand on it a little. So yeah, and then again, like I said, all of this is API driven. So if you're familiar with just, your workflow incorporates API calls, by all means, we build that first. So we have an extensive list of what you can do with our APIs. We also have cross-plane, Terraform, whatever. So that is essentially what's going. Oops, I did not mean to keep editing. I want to go here. So that's essentially what's going on at like the palette profile level. And then since we have a cluster that is existing using this profile, we can actually start looking at like the actual edge host or everything that is connected at home. So one thing I did want to touch on was if we click on this edge host, this is sitting at my house and we use this thing called Edge VPN, and you can actually start interacting with it pretty much just immediately. I used a Kairos build and I hate this. You're wondering, it's just Kairos, and it's going to give me another warning. And yeah, this is also our next release. This is tech preview, but will be GA. And so if you wanted to operate at the very edge, you will have like a console immediately accessible to your platform. So yeah, just because it's a pretty technical crowd, there was one thing I wanted to test for you guys, or at least show you guys. So we're all familiar with like etcd and why, when someone says, hey, I want a Kubernetes cluster at the edge, how's that going to work? Well, you're gonna have to send 3 servers. And so if you start thinking about, either retail spaces or oil and drilling or anything that needs, kind of that configurable deployment at the edge and scale it out to tens of thousands, when you add one single server to that, that ends up becoming pretty costly. So what we have here is we actually have a version of Kubernetes and a version of our OS that is essentially, I don't have like a pretty way of showing this, but it is 2 nodes and it is technically highly available. And we accomplished that by creating Postgres database and actually having a shim called Kine operating to mimic the etcd calls. So we'll have a leader and follower like we just would in normal quorum. And we are seeing a lot of individuals adopt this specifically because they just, if they have a point of sale system, if one node goes down, they can still transact or something along those lines, right? So this was one thing that I was really attached to when I came on board about 2 months ago. So do you guys have any other questions about this, or I guess comments?
Is this vanilla Kubernetes at this point?
This one right here is K3S. We do change like some configurations in it, but we do support just like kubeadm. We also have our own version of like kubeadm, but not necessarily like vanilla. But yeah.
If I use this for a GKE cluster, a lot of like if you fully buy into like the GKE stuff, it does a lot for you kind of automatically, right? Like GPU drivers and service mesh and log and metric scrapers, all that kind of stuff. Where does that all live if you're building it this way, rather than like, using Terraform to stand up a GKE instance?
So that depends on like if you want to you would manage the worker nodes here, and the control plane's still going to exist inside of GKE. And you can define what applications you're actually going to be deploying. So for instance, if you wanted to import your existing clusters, you would actually only be able to apply not a full profile, but what we called those add-ons. So it's like an add-on profile, which would just be applications, not like the infrastructure layer, not the Kubernetes and stuff, because you would have to just manage that in GKE. But any kind of tooling like that, you could then version into profiles and add it as a pack, and then you could manage like whatever you're deploying in there. So yeah, all that stuff that they're doing automatically, I mean, it will still happen on the control plane level, but if you have any applications that you're deploying in GKE in the cloud, you can then just change into an add-on profile. But does that answer your question?
Maybe. Not sure. Like in this example,
Mhm.
this is GKE, but you have all those lower layers that you just said you wouldn't have.
Yeah, so this is if I was deploying a profile. So this isn't a cluster that exists. This is just a profile that is defining a full stack. I could go press to specify like, hey, I got to deploy for full, and then go through that whole build process that I was showing you prior, select an account, etc. And don't think my credentials exist anymore. But yeah, does that make sense?
Like how much can you really customize those lower layers? Like GKE lets you mess with all of those layers. I guess I would have thought that most of that would.
Service accounts and
Yep.
there's still plenty of flags to flip on GKE. And you also have, you're not using the CAPI stuff for GKE, that's for IaaS stacks on.
No, I believe we're using CapG for, yeah, I believe so, yeah.
I don't think that's very well supported on GKE proper. On the actual.
We do have like, well, we made it an offering. I know that was the most recent release for our like provided clusters. IaaS, yes, we are for sure, but I thought we were using CapG. Double check. If it's not, you're the Google guy, so you'd know better than me.
I had one question come up and the response was, we don't think it's very well maintained for GKE proper clusters. For
Okay.
the IaaS stack, if you want to hydrate a cluster into VMs, like that was still a well-trod path, but there wasn't a ton of people using it for GKE.
That makes sense. Okay.
So a lot of this would replace what you maybe would do with like Terraform instead of hydrating cluster with subnets and flags on the GKE.
Initially, like to get that initial setup, and then you could just plug that into Terraform as well. Yeah, and again, like, I don't know if it's any freed or if it shows any like usability, like the fact that these are all clusters, like in multiple clouds, out the edge, all in a single tenant, multiple users. That is one of the biggest benefits to us, especially like we're seeing a lot of interest for our edge use cases, specifically from like retail. So if you're in like the CAS offering, like, so that's what we call it for hyperscalers, we still definitely have a play, but I believe our strengths are going to be in edge. We also have a KubeVirt offering. So virtualizing Kubernetes. We have that over here actually it's just a Kubernetes cluster, but sorry.
No, I think it's just piggybacking kind of that, and you're kind of getting into that profile of where a customer would say, yes, this is a great solution, meaning it sounds like what you're saying is like the edge is definitely, a self-contained thing. You want it just to be bootstrapped and you just roll the box, out it goes, it pops up, it's going. You also have then at the far end where you have hundreds of clusters, if not thousands of clusters that you're managing across various systems. But I guess where do you get where you have a cluster
A cluster?
in let's say GKE? Where is that value prop in such a world, other than we've kind of talked about a few things, but yeah, when does it that we have to learn new stuff versus just kind of continue on with what we're doing?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. So I've actually I've tackled this question with one of my buddies who essentially works and they have a massive EKS cluster for their production. It's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nodes. This would give you the ability, if you adopted the profile stack, to be able to have like, oh, this is everything that's deployed in our production cluster. And then you give access to say like, hey, you build a project for, you know, a very specific service. And then they only have access to that pack. But then there's like an entire tenant-wide administrator that can see like, hey, these are the versions of everything that is completely deployed in this cluster. So that would require like either building it up or just adopting and like pushing it via a profile add-on. But that is one thing that if somebody just has like a giant single cluster, which is definitely a use case.
Does Rancher have similar, like, this seems very much like a Rancher that you get to build your own opinions around, whereas
Yep.
Rancher has a lot of more like, nope, you kind of got to go this way, or
Yep.
here's our base image, you're going to use it.
Yeah, that's why I'm here. Yeah, no, I mean, so, yeah, and that was one of the issues. I really just believe like where I think Pallet will have a stay is we just want to make people's jobs easier in standing up infrastructure. They started doing like weird stuff. And that's why a lot of the engineers from Rancher are here now. But yes, that is exactly right. So if you want to customize it, we support it. It's like CNCF. We actually do even take like first calls on stuff that's not necessarily like in our support agreement. Because we just have a really good support team and they work like, well, God bless them. Because they work around the clock to make things anytime there's a support case that comes up. But yeah.
Like a lot of people will say, you know, backstage for platform engineering for Kubernetes, which sure, but like there's nothing there for Kubernetes. Like it's just a UI surface area for like Fortune 100 companies to build around. This actually has multi-tenancy things that you can stamp into even a single cluster.
Yep.
I know Rancher has some, but like that's more basic namespace stuff. I don't
Yeah,
know
it was
if they have.
namespace and projects, which is like now hierarchical namespaces. So it's not even like unique to them or anything. And so, yeah, that's
I don't
that.
even know if there's anything I would say fits that, like they actually try to give you multi-tenancy on one cluster or a fleet of clusters.
Yeah, no.
What about the V cluster stuff though?
So vCluster, their approach is like, well, we'll just give everyone their own cluster.
Inside a
And I
cluster.
don't know if it's virtual or not.
Right.
And that sort of works, but it still doesn't like, it just moves the ball one level. Well, somebody still has to write all the permissions and the cluster roles and like actually implementing tenancy in Kubernetes is usually a team's job. It is not a product that I've seen you can buy off the shelf. This is maybe one of the closer things I've seen.
Yeah, and we actually do support virtual clusters. So we actually have the ability to essentially build out a virtual cluster. So this is containerized worker nodes. And essentially it has a syncer that's talking to everything that's working on the virtual cluster. But it allows you to, again, if you have a CRD that's the exact same but different version, you can deploy it technically in the same cluster. Like for instance, this is all in the same cluster group of the VMO clusters. So it's going to be, these are all 4 clusters built in the same cluster, and it's going to be using, let's see what profile, I don't know what this is. This is just my coworker's environment. Let's see what profile he's using for this. And maybe it's going to be an issue because it's on his MAS host cluster. So he doesn't have the profile available to me, but we do support it and we have built that out. That is another thing we have to offer. So if we actually went to VMO Orchestrator, where those virtual clusters are existing, you can go into, let's see, web page. So we have a service that should pop up here that is going to be a virtual machines tab. Would that be of it? Do you guys even want to see that? Is that something of interest to you guys? We've built out our opinion of a KubeVirt, which is going to be called the virtual machine orchestrator down here. So it's just a pack. It's just a Helm chart. It's a freaking huge Helm chart, but it's a Helm chart. And there's the virtual machines. And what this allows you to do is spin up virtual machines as containers that operate as KVM virtual machines on the host. And once that stands up,
And the permissioning and count and all that stuff is just with inside as a black box on top of that. Meaning you're not doing any administration with inside of the VM itself, right?
no, that's going to be all defined like on the actual VM. So yes, the VM is essentially going to be a, I think this is a fun one because it actually has the VNC running Windows. And yeah, and this it'd be this is a completely different approach. This is turning into more than an edge conversation, but I do want to just, hey, this is our platform. So this is a different approach to virtual machines. you're defining everything in a YAML file, as you can see here. And, there's going to be some benefits. And I think that it would tremendously help some of these older shops adopt, modernize their platform if they're trying to get into containerized applications. But the big thing here is you can declaratively define things like PCI devices. Once you actually get the nomenclature down, I've seen this in Kubert where you can tie in like a USB drive and you can name it, you can tear down the virtual machine and then just bring up a whole nother virtual machine with maybe a different OS, but you've specified that USB drive. And it will attach the USB drive to that virtual machine. And that's just simply done by changing like a configuration or, doing a kubectl apply to a YAML essentially. So pretty powerful there. And yeah, so that's just kind of some of that there.
So again, sorry, so your application of this, or I should say those that are interested in it are from a migration point of view, or is it also for isolation? Or is it, where do you actually?
People that we've seen this, they're pissed at Broadcom. The customers that have gotten this, they also usually are a shop that has essentially bought into Kubernetes and want to transition. I would never say this is going to be a complete one-to-one to VMware. That'd be insane to say. But it is an option out there. Yeah, exactly. And
that curve of laggard applications that remain on Windows 98 forever.
Yeah.
You can still run it.
Oh, they're going to migrate those next month.
Wait, was it American Airlines that still had Windows 3.2 or something, and so the CrowdStrike didn't affect them?
Southwest?
Probably Southwest, yeah, from their flight experience as a customer might have been. But yeah, that's kind of just the gist of what we offer.
So this is coming out, you're saying, or it's
That already exists. Everything about this is a live SaaS version that gets rolling updates. So this is our production. This is the exact situation that a customer would be using.
and maybe you're going to go into it, or you have a sense of what is available for the open source.
So that's the one thing. The open source tool is completely Kairos. The CEO made the decision that we are going to be like this is all proprietary for profit. But the Kairos was the project that we wanted to spin off to everyone else. So the actual palette is a paid product. So
And a SaaS product too.
SaaS or on-prem. Yeah. So yeah.
How popular is Zarf?
Zarf, we're super,
Oh,
we have a ton of defense contracts.
So the people that really are like, no, this will be air gaps.
Yes, they have some serious air gap requirements, like not hey, I want an air gap situation, but I want to still talk to the public cloud. I'm like, that's not air gap.
Would you say it actually works well too? Like they literally cover all of the dependencies and hide them on the other side of it?
I haven't heard of an issue happening, but yeah, I can get back to you and see if there's
I'm
any
just curious. That's the first I've heard of it, but.
Yeah. So, you had a question?
Yeah, what does it look like to bootstrap those like dark nodes? Like, do you have to connect, to a home instance of Palette first, and then you can air gap it, or like,
So
how do you start a fresh dark
So
node?
there's a few ways you would essentially go through. Let's see if I have my VS Code up. So you would go in and essentially build out your Docker file, your argument file, and then some user data. This is like the very, very high level. And that's going to input things like your applications, everything like that. And then the user data section would actually have like a profile built in. That profile will have your application deployed, ready to go. And so you just do, I think I have, let's see, do I have? Yeah, you essentially just do this build all the images. And, oh, you guys now know my Wi-Fi password at home. Anyway.
I can take that out of the recording.
Yeah. Thank you. But yeah, it's just to build ISO like this, like simply. So you just hardware, and yeah, it doesn't look pretty yet. We do have that is in tech preview. It's called appliance. Spectro Cloud appliances. Yes, because you want to build appliances. And it'll be like a nice little UI where you can just inject packs and everything like that. It'll do like this little earthly Docker file build. So yeah.
So basically, it is,
An ISO,
I can
that's why.
boot off the ISO.
Yeah.
No wires anywhere.
And then it injects all of Pappy, it injects everything that we've built with what we call the stylus agent. And that is actually taking care of that reconciliation loop for all of your services that you built into your application.
Is that reconciliation also part of the compilation, meaning, or do you have to find out that there's a problem afterwards, meaning in your Kairos, is that how it's pronounced?
Kairos.
Yeah.
That's a great question that I haven't been asked yet. This is still fairly new to me. I've been here for 2 months, so I'll have to get back to you the next time I come here.
That would be nice to have at least as many issues be taken care of on the side of it versus the actual, oops, I shipped that box and didn't quite work how I thought.
Cool.
I think you mentioned like ML inference at the edge at some point early on. GPUs make everything worse and harder. What's the GPU story like here? Is that a common use case? You know, particularly like outside of hyperscalers, like actually at the edge.
We just barely, what was the title of it? Oh my gosh. We just barely released like something with NVIDIA and was it like TPU? I can pull up, we have actually a whole article of what we just did with that. And it is, I believe it is strictly AI at the edge.
So you freeze a root file system. You're not like
With Kairos?
Talos, where
Yeah.
Talos is like,
You don't even get
there
it.
is no,
Yeah.
there's nothing but a Kubernetes API. If you can't do it in a daemon set, you're screwed.
Mhm.
You could use Packer, you can do whatever you want traditional tool wise, and then you have an agent that freezes the root FS. Is that a better way of understanding?
Yeah, I believe so. I wouldn't say I'm like the deepest expert on this quite yet. But yeah, from what I talked to the principal architect about it, like, yeah, it's like the init RAM FS. It's defined and then frozen. And then if you build, there are like ways to, again, like I said, I think bind mounts to make those something in there, not.
So I don't think it makes the pain any less in terms of having to make sure the drivers work and like what is the right driver for this virtual machine.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't make it harder, which there are other tools that attempt to do this. And even Rancher's gonna have a very opinionated thing. And those GDC has very opinionated ways of what drivers work, what drivers don't. Container OS, you're screwed. There's, you get whatever's in the box and that's about it. This approach has allowing of options and you bring a custom ASIC GPU to the table. You can use traditional Linux tools to make it work and then you freeze and get the benefits of immutability.
But you could lock it down like a Talos if you wanted to, I guess.
Talos mostly works, but it is an incredibly opinionated and frustrating way of trying to do things because its opinion that it would never likely give up is everything is done by a daemon set.
Yeah, but I mean, let me rephrase it. Could you use Flatcar for this? Isn't that Flatcar is the old CoreOS thingy?
Right. A flat pack?
A flat pack, excuse me. Could you use that as the base OS if you wanted to?
I don't know. Is it system D?
Yeah, it's probably just dependent on how close to
That's what I was wondering.
a system D style setup.
Yeah, if it has a system D in it, that was like the big thing with Kairos. And
Yeah.
yeah, there are ways to get around it, like they did with Alpine, but that you'd have to maintain that yourselves. We're only providing the Alpine. I guess the goodness of our heart. I don't know. Yeah. Cool. Well, that kind of concludes my demonstration and conversation about it all. Are there any other questions?
In terms of hobbyist access, is there SKUs that could, I think Talos has.
We have like a trial. You got a big company behind you. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, there was a trial offering. I think we took it off, but we're bringing it back on board. Since it is just a SaaS offering, it's like you could just stand it up in any of the major clouds, I believe. Yeah, all the major clouds. And then the Kairos option, also definitely take a look. super excited about that project and I hope it catches traction.
So, you know, MSRP and all that other junk and bigness and blah, 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 but I mean, your costing model for paid product, is it a node basis? Is it a?
It's actually consumption, so it's kilocore hours.
Okay.
And which has tended, so that's for like traditional Kubernetes clusters, but once you start doing like the edge, then it's a little different. And that's like per node. But yeah, like a traditional EKS, GKE, it's consumption model and it's just based off of your kilocore hours. So it's like you can buy like a bucket. So you say you have a bucket and you start running out of space in the bucket, you could just add to the bucket.
And your virtual machine, is that the same?
It's all included. Yeah, none of that is, everything in our platform is included with like a single 3 SKUs, I think. It's like Edge, CAS, and then the actual either hosted or SaaS or dedicated SaaS environment. So yeah, it's a pretty simple process.
Do you have, not that you'd ever want this, but what is your migration path off of?
Oh, I don't know.
Can you detach if you have a GKE cluster or something?
Oh, I do know it is. I do know it's possible. I don't necessarily know like the finer details. I'm assuming it would just remove our CRDs because it's, yeah.
Because I mean, you want to be able to have it pretty seamless because you want to make sure that I like it, but I can't do it anymore. And then I don't have to tear it all the way down and then restart again, right? So there's probably a nice off-boarding or off-ramping.
Yeah, that's a great question that I'll have to let you know.
No, you'd want to, you know, but people were going to ask that.
I only think positively.
Makes it easier to onboard when you know there's a safe offboard.
Yeah, especially if you're going to trial on a real system.
Cool. I'll leave this up in case you guys wanted to check out the project built Gates ISO. So again, the thing you want to look for, Edge, it's like Kairos Factory. You can also just download like pre-built Ubuntu, Alpine, Debian, OpenSUSE images. I'll let you know when I build an Arch image. Because, yeah.
Into, I want.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other good questions? And any bad questions like I've given? Any questions at all? All right, well, thank you very much.